True North is an original podcast by Due North PR. We do everything we can to ensure that everything we broadcast is fair and factual, but the opinions expressed and statements made by our guests are theirs and theirs alone. These opinions and statements do not reflect the views or opinions of our presenters, Due North PR, or the podcast itself. You're listening to True North, a regular roundup of business and community news and developments in Northland. Hello and welcome to True North. Thank you for taking the time to listen. It's Wednesday, the 14th of May. I'm Peter Heath. On the show ahead...
Now, it might be tempting for smaller organisations to think that they can skip class on this one. But I would say to them, you can't. You're going to get sent to detention by government if you do.
I speak with George Hulbert, a corporate communications specialist, rather like yours truly, but one who specialises in helping businesses win bids and tenders, and position themselves most effectively for this success, particularly in the area of work commissioned by government agencies and local government. We were due to be speaking with NZTA's Steve Mutton about how Northland businesses could be positioning themselves to work on the construction of the Northland Corridor, specifically the Warkworth to Tahana leg. But NZTA's lawyers put the kibosh on that at the very last moment. I'm confident that Northland businesses will learn just as much from what George has to say about winning work from agencies like NZTA. First, though, a look at what's happening in business and community news across our region. Whangarei got a good look in at one of the cruise industry's most important events held in Miami earlier this year, the Sea Trade Cruise Global Conference. Northport was part of an 8-strong contingent of ports with a presence on the New Zealand Cruise Association stand. Northport cruise manager Ken Andrews said cruise lines raised several mega issues that had reduced the number of cruise calls at ports all around the country and which look set to impact numbers for next season and possibly even into the 2026-2027 season. They were clear that New Zealand remains an extremely popular cruise destination, but they wanted New Zealand ports, tourism marketing bodies and policymakers to understand their destination planning horizon, in many cases up to 4 years, and the 18-month to 2-year lead time in cruise sales. This meant that New Zealand had to communicate with cruise lines more proactively and earlier about intended pricing and policy changes that will impact their bottom lines. Port fee increases and biosecurity rule changes are 2 cases in point. Mr. Andrews said Northport's attendance had generated some significant opportunities that Northport wouldn't have been able to create or take advantage of if it hadn't been part of the New Zealand cruise contingent. With Northland's regional deal application focusing on future energy innovation and the decarbonisation of our regional fishing fleet, our innovative marine engineering sector will have pricked its ears at news earlier this month that Tasmanian shipbuilder Incat has launched the world's largest electric ship. The vessel, named Hull 096, will operate as a ferry between Argentina and Uruguay. At 130 metres long, Hull 096 can carry up to 2,100 passengers and 225 vehicles, making it not only the largest electric ship globally, but also the largest electric vehicle of its kind ever constructed. She's equipped with over 250 tonnes of batteries and boasts more than 40 megawatt hours of energy storage, 4 times more than any previous marine installation. Power is delivered via 8 electric-driven water jets. Right. Any organisation bidding or tendering for a government contract or grant will be familiar by now with the fact that it's no longer good enough to show you can do the job well and to budget. Back in 2018, the Labour government of the day mandated a step change in government procurement rules. Any bid or tender for government money needed to be shaped within the framework of something called broader outcomes, showing how it would support wider social, economic, cultural, and environmental outcomes that go beyond the immediate purchase of goods and services. Leveraging Wellington's purchasing power to help deliver on policy priorities became, quite literally, the order of the day. Fast forward to 2025, and there's a very different sheriff in town. Perhaps unsurprisingly, the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Environment is seeking feedback on a new proposed edition of the Government Procurement Rules. At first glance, it looks like changes proposed in the consultation document may have finally killed off these broader outcomes. However, on closer inspection, it seems that this might not be quite the case. The consultation document shows that the focus still remains on the core concept of public value, seeking good price and quality outcomes while still seeking to blend in social, cultural, environmental, and economic outcomes. MB says it wants to replace the broader outcomes rules with a rule requiring agencies to include economic benefits to New Zealand in all procurements. There will be a minimum 10% weighting for evaluation purposes on the so-called economic benefit criteria. But, and here's the kicker, these criteria include providing skills and training that benefit New Zealand communities, using New Zealand businesses, including Māori and Pacifica businesses, as subcontractors and suppliers, providing environmental benefit to New Zealand, and contributing to positive social and cultural outcomes in New Zealand communities. So, is this broader outcomes with a different wrapper? And how should any organisation bidding or tendering for a government contract or grant be adjusting the approach required since 2018? Well, with me today to unpack all of this is George Hulbert of the Clarity Business. George has helped organisations to win more than $11 billion of work over the past 2 decades. Working on the commercial bidder side of the equation, he's seen procurement themes evolve over the years and is always looking to help companies to adapt, align, and achieve within them. Hey, George, thanks so much for joining us on True North.
Hey, Peter, thanks very much for having me. And may I say, you're looking very smart today. Although it's covered by your microphone, I know you're wearing a tie for once. Let's look at that. That's lovely.
Well, you know, I just thought with the august company on the show today, I should make an effort.
Well, that's interesting you say that, because I feel something of an imposter when I consider some of the excellent Northland speakers you've had over recent weeks. I'm still, still looking at Ocean Flyer as something I'm really hoping to be able to take up north in the not too distant future.
Oh, you know what? There are so many people that have responded to that and are so keen to give that service a try. I really, really hope it comes to fruition. It'd be good to have you up north. It's been a while. You've been slumming down in Auckland for way too long.
Well, I am a filthy Pommy Jaffa. There is no doubt about that. But I do spend more time coming up and down to Whangarei than you might think.
Oh, well, good stuff. So, hey, mate, let's just kick off with that very basic question.
Yep.
Is this new approach being consulted on by MB simply broader outcomes with a different wrapper?
In some ways, yes. But I prefer to think of it actually as something of a consistent evolution. It's definitely something that you might think is off the menu as the world changes around us and we read nothing in the media other than how countries and companies are pulling back on their ESG spend. But actually, the government here in New Zealand has been pretty consistent about this. In 2018, when the broader outcomes first came along, all the way through to now, there's an absolute line of thought all the way through. So in many ways, yes, and in some ways, no.
George, what are we talking about here? What are these wider social, economic, cultural, and environmental outcomes that government is trying to achieve through this work?
Well, there's 4 areas. There's economic, social, cultural, and environmental. Economic means building skills. So that is in your area, through your contract or the work you're doing, how are you building skills within your own organization and within the people around you? Socially, it's about opportunity. So how are you involving Māori and Pacifica people or businesses in your work, and how are you helping them to get better? Environmentally is about 2 things: reducing emissions and reducing waste, usually, as far as I see it in actual procurements. And culturally, again, it's about being more culturally aware in your own organization, but also in the work that you're doing to build cultural links and to make sure that we're delivering on the principles of the Treaty of Waitangi.
Great. That's fairly simple. That's what it is. It is what it says on tin. Is this something that you are doing as an organization? And can you demonstrate it?
Yeah, so for me, the simplest thing I'd say is about what can you do to live those things, and then what are the stories that you can tell about that. So, for example, from a social perspective and from an economic perspective, is your organization involved, if you're in the construction or land or property development space, in, for example, the Keystone Trust, which helps disadvantaged people from all over the country to get through into tertiary and through tertiary degrees, to get them in the industry and then provide them with networks and contacts to help them to do that. Are you helping to do that in your work? And can you tell stories about that work? That's the sort of thing. Is it real? Or is it inspirational waffle where you just say it's important to us and then not provide examples? At the heart of it, it comes down to what examples can you show us? What tangible things are you doing?
So, is some form of socially leveraged government procurement policy with us for the very long term, do you think? Is this something that serial bidders and tenderers need to bank on, so to speak, if they haven't done so already?
Well, if they're looking to win work through formal procurement channels, through government agencies or departments, and to a greater or lesser degree at local authority level, they're going to need to look at it. Whether or not it applies in an operational context, it certainly applies through the procurement gateway, by which I mean anyone looking to win work through the formal GETS process. So the recent government rules consultation, which has actually closed, was about anything for goods and services over $100,000 in value, or for construction contracts over $9 million in value. So that sets kind of a level. Anything above that in those environments will require notice in this area. I would say there's a couple of aspects to this, though, Peter, because these are rules given by MB to government agencies, and they are picked up and used differently by different agencies. For example, Kainga Ora might favor the social dimension more than some others, perhaps. For example, I know the Ministry of Education finds it very important. It's also about building local skills as much as anything else as well. It's used slightly with varying levels by different agencies. And then at a local procurement level, it's again has its own emphases. So the question you ask is it here to stay? I would say definitely for the foreseeable future. It's in the sort of political dimension, clearly, but it's also very much in the procurement dimension. So all the procurement people and processes in these organizations are now required, or are still required, to do this. So yes.
Okay. So to what extent has the concept of socially leveraged procurement trickled down from central government to become policy at regional and local government level?
Well, again, I suppose I'd say it differs from council to council, or from body to body. But what I am seeing is, if anything, in many councils, it's going up in value and importance. It's hugely important, certainly across. I realise this is further down than Northland, but at Auckland Council level, this is hugely important. At Auckland Council, Watercare, Auckland Transport, all of these organisations still prioritise it very heavily in their procurement. I am seeing it further up north in some of the tenders that we're looking at, working with organisations, whether that's a departmental level or at a local authority level. But it's still a feature.
Okay. So similarly, how far down the bidder and tenderer food chain has the response to this policy been? Bigger companies, of course, will certainly have taken steps to comply. But what about the smaller mom and pop operations up and down the country, George?
Well, the way the government is doing it is, again, as I'd say, if you're bidding to win more than $100,000 in goods services through this gateway, you need to do it. If you're looking at a construction project or budget over $9 million, you need to do it. It's a pretty solid lever they're pulling here. Now, it might be tempting for smaller organizations to think that they can skip class on this one. But I would say to them, You can't. You're going to get sent to detention by government if you do, because it's still the gateway through which you're going. These are weighted attributes, or in many cases, pass-fail criteria. So you've got to do it or you fail, or you've got to do it and you score low marks on your weighted attributes, which means you're disadvantaging yourself.
But are these guys doing this? Are they skipping class, or are they attending class and getting the grades? I guess what I'm trying to get to is, to what extent are smaller companies starting to become locked out by the process?
Good question. And I hate to keep answering that it differs, but it does. Some are, some aren't. Some have really grasped this, and for a long time before the broader outcomes, because they are genuinely motivated to understand that they're not just doing a job of work, they're doing a job in a community for a certain organization or a group or community, and that there is an opportunity to improve their standing in the community by doing this well. You know, in the true public value sense of the word, doing their job well, doing it at good quality, but doing these other things as well. In fact, I would say that where the broader outcomes and public value differ slightly, in my mind, and I realize I'm a market survey of one here, is that the broader outcomes carried a sort of inference that it was broader, secondary, and in fact is often described in procurement as a secondary set of outcomes. Where public value, I think, differs is that it's on an equal footing. It may be only 10% of a weighting, but it's still on an equal basis if you look at the diagrams that the government has put forwards. And in fact, since Kyanga has been doing this since 2020, is that those three things are the same. So organizations who want to do this well should be doing this, which draws us into a different debate about, you know, the nature of what organizations are there to do. Are they there to do their job well, or to deliver some good community, social, environmental benefit on the way through?
Interesting. So you made a good point about the weighting being 10% currently, or at least the consulted weighting being 10%. When are we going to find out the results of the consultation, by the way? When's the actual final written thing coming through?
If I'm completely honest with you, I don't know. The consultation closed at the beginning of April. I'm sure eagle-eyed listeners will send messages in to update us both. But what the government said it would do, MB said it would then absorb the feedback into its procurement rules.
Okay.
Personally, I would be surprised if I saw huge components of change here, because this is a fairly, as I say, consistently evolving picture. This isn't radically changed by policy.
Okay. So going back to the question I was going to ask, they've been consulting on a 10% weighting. Is that 10% lower than the previous broader outcomes weightings?
Well, over the time since 2018, I've seen it go from 2 to 3 to 5 to 10 to 15 up to 20%, and then in some panel, all of government tenders as high as 40%.
Wow! So broader outcomes issues, social issues, have comprised up to 40% of a
And then some organisations turned it into a pass-fail precondition, which I think is actually the strongest possible thing that you can do. You don't even get to the weighted attributes unless you pass the preconditions.
Okay.
But you know, I would say that it's important and it needs to be paid attention to by everybody, even at 10%. 10% can mean the difference between winning or not.
Okay. And just for those eagle-eyed listeners that you referred to, describe the 10%. What are we talking about here when we talk about 10%?
10% of so when you go through a procurement exercise, you'll look at an RFP document and it will say, these are the criteria that we're going to ask you questions about, and here are the questions. And this has 25% weighting, this has 25% weighting, this has 10, this has 10, and these two have 5 each. So that takes you up to whatever, hopefully 100. Maths, always a strong suit. But at the same time, so it's important because it's trying to pull the lever to make this noticeable and important for organizations to do, big or small. And I would say this isn't about, oh my gosh, we need to spend loads and loads of money doing this. They're asking you to make this part of your business settings. How do we go about doing our work? We want to do a great job, but we also want to leave a legacy of skills behind us. So how are we going to do that? Do we train people while we're doing it? Do we engage local communities to help them be part of the supply chain? Do we involve local schools so they can understand and see a world of work that might appeal to students? Those sorts of questions. It's a how you do things approach, not necessarily a, right, we've got to throw a ton of money at it type scenario.
Okay. Yeah, understood. So listen, typically what are procurement managers looking for from a bidder when it comes to social, economic, cultural, and environmental outcomes? Is it all around the values, culture, and impact of an organization's own ongoing operations, if you like, the internal machinery of that operation?
Yep.
Or is it very specifically around the specific outcomes of the individual project at hand? Is it an internal thing, or is it a project-specific thing?
Well, first I'd say, Peter, there's different types of bids out there. Some are for specific projects. Some are for ongoing multi-year framework contracts, or, to get on a panel, might not even have a contract attached to it. So they're looking for your approach. How do you do this? And for me, the simplest way of looking at it is, what they really want to know is, do you have at your heart of your organization, business, a structure, a plan, a purpose? Are you doing this to do well and to do well? Are you then going to simply categorize how you do that? They're trying to drive organizations to do things well socially and environmentally and in other areas, but particularly in those two areas.
In other words, on an ongoing basis within their organizations, not necessarily being a dog of a company that's doing a fantastic community outreach on a specific project. They don't want to work with dogs of companies that are doing things that way. They would rather work with a company that actually has a good set of value-driven purposes internally and on an ongoing basis, right? Is that's where they're coming from. That's what companies are starting to have to show.
When you look behind the mechanics of all this, I've always believed this is the government, quite simply trying to make change. And the change they want companies to make is to be more environmentally friendly, lower their emissions, lower their waste to head towards New Zealand's own carbon zero targets, but also to involve more organizations, Māori and Pacifica, other groups, and smaller businesses locally, so that it spreads the wealth in local areas as well as nationally. So they're trying very simply and pulling a strong lever to do this. And so this is what this is about. So absolutely.
So they're looking for structural performance of bidding companies, not necessarily, or possibly in addition to the actual project-based outcomes.
As I say, they want to know, how do you go about your business? What motivates you? How do you do things? They want to see a structure. They want to see, for companies I work with, I help them create a very simple structure. These things matter to us. Right. Okay. Then next, what are we going to do about that? What are the things that we do to demonstrate that this is important to us? So often, I can ask companies, so what, when I hear what I call inspirational waffle. Oh, we're deeply committed. It's hugely important. Okay, so what have you done about it? That's what we need to do. So there's an element of structure. Then there's a need to do things. And then the thing that I find Kiwi companies find most difficult, which is to show it, talk about it. Often I'll talk to organizations, they go, look, we've been doing this sort of thing for years. I go, fantastic. Got any stories? Got any photos? Where's your newsletters? And they go, well, we're not so good at that bit. Okay, right. So how do we do this? And how do we show it? I'm not asking organizations to, raise the trumpet section and make huge noise. Just they need to show it consistently and on an ongoing basis to the organizations who would be their clients in future.
Gosh, I wonder if only there were companies around that actually helped companies do that, George.
Well, yeah, funny that. But honestly, it's...
if only, there was public relations, maybe, something like that. Anyway,
yeah.
moving on.
About what your audiences want. When I work with organizations, the first thing I say to them is, okay, so what are the bids you're looking to win this year and if possible next year? Can you see them? Do you know the organizations that you're bidding to or will be? If you know those organizations and who they are, whether that's council or government department, what matters to them? They're very keen to tell us. It's all
Yeah.
over the internet. So, okay, so we can still create the structure, even if you don't know what the bids are that are coming. You can create the structure, you can do the work, you can do the doing, and then you can do the showing on a consistent basis. And what the best thing about that is it saves you time when you get to the bid process as well, because if you've already got the stories in a newsletter or some kind of other environment, maybe you stuck it on your website or social media, you just grab it and pop it in. And
Yeah.
it's demonstrable proof that you.
And if I can make a
do this.
very, very brief cry from the heart and a heartfelt plea to companies, for God's sake, do the doing and then do the telling.
Yes.
Don't do it the other way around.
Well, the way I look at it is if you do all the doing but no telling or showing, you're invisible to the organizations you want to win work from. If you do all the telling and none of the doing, then that's called greenwashing.
Yeah. And that
So-
kills your credibility. Absolutely.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
you've got to do both in an even-handed way. First the doing, then the showing.
Yep, absolutely. Now, George, if a piece of work is awarded to a smaller family-owned and community-based business, aren't these broader or social outcomes being delivered by default anyway? So I guess why the need to formalize this stuff with all the added complexity and cost that this lumps onto these smaller enterprises?
Yeah, it's a good question, but I don't think this relates to the size of an organization. As I say, it's a how we do things type of thing. And some of the best organizations I've worked with have been small SMEs. One in particular is now a larger SME, largely through the application of this. It's a print company called Saw Print that's now called SCG. They've been doing this since 2009 because they're motivated to actually give their employees a great experience of working for them and to be environmentally friendly in an industry, print, that consumes paper, water, energy, and all sorts of other things. And so since 2009, they've been putting in processes to just capture, measure all the water and electricity and materials they consume. And they've shown how they've reduced that over time. It doesn't have to be hugely complicated. Actually, done well, it's really simple. I think it's been made very complicated by bigger organizations, but it doesn't need to be. And it doesn't need to cost the earth in doing so. It's a question of what's important to you and how you go about doing it. So I would say, given that 93% of organizations in New Zealand are SMEs, the biggest opportunity for this country to make good change and for organizations to stand out from one another is by making some of these changes. They don't have to be big. They just need to be incremental over time.
George, doesn't a socially leveraged procurement policy lock a huge proportion of New Zealand businesses out of the game? Doesn't the need to demonstrate these social, economic, cultural, and environmental capabilities add a huge degree of complexity and expense to a smaller company's operation?
It shouldn't necessarily. As I keep banging on about, it's about how you do things. So it also, some smaller businesses may in themselves demonstrate the values the government is looking to show. So, for example, if you're more than 50% Māori or Pacifica owned as a business, you're probably ticking the government criteria very strongly already. But if you are that, but behaving poorly environmentally, you're probably going to need to make some change and to do some doing and then do some showing. It doesn't necessarily mean you have to sign up to expensive certification models and those sorts of things. The government often would like businesses that like to do better in this area to get involved with, for example, Amotai, so that they access a world of Māori and Pacifica procurement themselves for their supply chain and suppliers, but also they just need to make sure that they're doing some things to reduce their waste and improve the way they perform from an emissions perspective. Don't necessarily need to sign up to a rating.
So, George, If government agencies and regional and local government are demanding that potential contractors demonstrate these socially beneficial aspects to their operation and work, should there, in your view, be some corresponding obligation on the part of those organizations putting the bids and tenders together to provide the training and assistance to bring smaller, often regionally based companies up to speed and able to put bids in for this work? Because if they don't do that, isn't the system simply locking these smaller mom and pop operations, which are often regionally based, right out of the game?
Well, it's a good question, Peter. I'd love to see it in many ways, but I have to say that as I help usually the bidders rather than the procurers, what I see is the bidding world. And I see that a lot of organizations that I work with, actually from smaller upwards, are already in some aspects doing this to help organizations who are their subcontractors to bid and to be better as well. The lever is being pulled. I mean, it would be great to see that, but I can't really comment on whether councils should be doing that. They may already in some instances. There may be organizations that help in this area, but because I see the commercial zone, what I see is the onus put onto those bidders to do that, and it's often quite explicit in an RFP saying how are you going to do this. So it is something that happens to a degree already. Whether it should be more widespread and consistent, perhaps that would be a good thing.
Yeah, I'm kind of thinking of situations where, say, for example, a council would like to work with a local roading contractor instead of one of the national guys.
Yeah.
But that local roading contractor hasn't got the necessary boxes ticked in order to qualify for that tender or that bid. And it then becomes sort of council's, if you like, obligation to ensure that local businesses are empowered, if you like, to take on the bigger guys who have got the resources and the bandwidth to make sure that they can tick those boxes.
Yeah. Yes. I have to say, I'm treading carefully here. One of my clients is a national roading contractor. And what I see of them is that they do actually take this very seriously, and they work with a number of subcontractors and suppliers who they do work hard with to help and bring forwards so that their performance is being lifted. But I think you're referring to other things as well. I think there's a Kaitaia model I think you might be referring to. I don't know it too well because really I'm on the commercial side, to be honest.
There was a case with there was a PGF project based in Kaitaia where council, as part of receiving that PGF money, had to work with local businesses, local businesses, Kaitaia specific businesses. Yep. And in order to do that, needed to ensure that those Kaitaia businesses were able to go through the council tendering process, or at least tick the boxes that were generally needed to undertake council work. And in order to do that, then spent a lot of time and effort training and bringing up those local providers to equip them with the skills in order that they could then put bids in for that council work, and which was of course being funded by PGF money. So it was all a sort of a virtuous circle. It was government money awarded to council on the basis that council would use local businesses, and in order for council to use those local businesses, council had to do a degree of training and bringing up to speed. But it worked really, really well, and there were a lot of businesses that had previously been locked out of council work up there in Kaitaia that today, through that process, are now able to put their bids on the table along with the bigger names. So that's the kind of obligation that I was kind of thinking of in terms of bidding and tendering organizations.
Well, maybe among your many listeners and viewers, Peter, there will be other councillors who will pipe up as a result of this and say that they're already doing that. Certainly, I would welcome it. It is definitely something that bids require organisations who bid to them to be better at. It is about skills development, ultimately, as much as anything else, this lever that they're pulling. So anything that improves that is to be welcomed.
Great. So, George, how are these social, economic, cultural, and environmental outcomes that form part of all these bids and tenders actually measured? Does anybody ever go back and measure or check against promises made or commitments made at the point of bid or tender? Or is it just something that you can say and get away with saying without necessarily living?
I think it varies, is the honest truth, Peter. I know some procuring organizations who've awarded a tender to a company and then spoken to that company afterwards and gone, right, there were 110 promises you made in that. Right, let's put KRAs and KPIs against each single one of those, which I think has made them feel quite nervous. But there are also increasingly, and I see this in a variety of areas, organizations, procurers going, right, we're now going to give you a series of spreadsheets after this, and we're going to be asking for your percentages of Marine Pacifica spend, for example, or the work that you're doing to reduce emissions or waste. And we're going to ask you to report on it monthly. So the move is afoot to take this more seriously. Whereas in the past, it may have been a little bit more hit and miss, depending on the organization involved. I think the next phase of this will always be about showing measurement. And from what I'm seeing, this is definitely coming through. So whilst it may be tempting to think, I'll just do this, I'll say it, and then forget about it, actually now there are processes coming forwards where people are being required to measure and report on a monthly basis.
Very good. Very good. George, look, this is a fascinating area. I hope you feel we've done it justice. I hope our listeners feel we've done it justice.
I've done it justice.
Yeah, well, when we first spoke to me, when we first spoke about this, you said to me, "Oh, it's a bit dry balls and it's a bit, it's a bit academic." But I don't think it's that at all. I think it's the way of the future. If organizations are going to be putting their names forward for any kind of sort of government spend or anything like that, as you said right up at the top, this isn't going to go away. It might evolve and metamorphosize in one way, shape, or form over the years, but it's not going away as a principle. So, yeah, an important topic, and I think you did a brilliant job talking us through it. Thank you very, very much indeed.
Well, thank you, Peter. Can I just say in parting that I'm really passionate about this because I think organizations who do these things are genuinely going to be better at doing their job as well. It's not complicated, this. It really is just about setting a simple structure in place and then doing and then showing. It's about adapting to your client's need. If you want to win work from them, align with them, show it. And then you're better placed to win it. It doesn't have to be complicated.
Between us, George,
wish people luck.
You can show them how to do it, and I can show them how to tell it. There you go. You got a gruesome twosome in Hulbert and Heath. Thank you.
That sounds like a podcast, Peter.
Thanks for your time, and look after yourself, and we'll catch up with you on the other side.
Thanks,
Cheers,
Peter.
George.
I've enjoyed it.
And that's all for today's program. Many thanks to George Hulbert of the Clarity Business. True North will return in 2 weeks' time on the 28th of May, when I'll be speaking with Jane Hindle, the long-time energy source behind the Bay of Islands R. Tucker Thompson Sailing Trust, and finding out what keeps her so enthused about the project. I'm Peter Heath. Thank you for listening. True North is an original podcast by Due North PR. To support our work and to stay on top of Northland business news and analysis, access the pod on Spotify, YouTube, LinkedIn, and Facebook. Please do take that small extra step and subscribe, like, follow, comment, and review, as it helps others find the show. Please also share it with those who may not yet be aware that we exist. As the New Zealand media landscape continues to change, we rely on your support to continue doing what we do. Please let us know what you think about the podcast. Ask questions or make suggestions about topics and people we should feature by emailing us at truenorth@duenorthpr.co.nz. We do read every message.